Hey, welcome back to the Speed Seekers podcast. Today, back on the show is my good friend Colin Braun. Colin, you're the winner. You have been on the show more than anybody else.
Oh man, you're getting, down the list of people to have on the show, apparently.
Well, maybe you should become a regular host,
Co-host.
co-host. Yeah. We could just get on here and we could beat up on other people. But
That's always a fun hobby of mine, I think.
yeah, well, and I would say that when I took this break from doing the podcast, people were like, hey, when's the podcast coming back? Our favorite is one with Colin in it, and so I've had a lot of comments about the stuff that you and I talked about. I'm not sure, for me personally, one of the highlights of my life, I'm going to say, take this the right way, but was that 2 years ago when you and Naj were doing the Michelin Le Mans Cup Series? I think that was,
Yeah.
and how you and I would meet up in some airport in Europe, get a rental car, and then struggle our way to a hotel or racetrack somewhere. And the fun that we had on those trips, talking driving mostly, but every now and then almost getting lost in Europe.
Man, that was certainly a lot of fun in 2018 for sure. I mean, I think some of those podcasts were probably better too because we were both, straight off the airplane from flying overnight, and half the time we were probably still a little bit jet lagged, not sure where we're going, trying to figure it all out. And so, yeah, that was pretty darn fun. That was definitely a highlight for me too.
I'm going to say the low light of that though was the trip where your luggage didn't show up because I got to be honest, the smell in that rental car, I'm not so sure about, especially after the third or fourth day going to the track.
Well, I think the tough part too is it rained, right? So like all my clothes were nasty and wet, and then you drive the race car, and of course they don't seal. No car seals up perfect, so you have like these wet, nasty, sweated in race clothes, and then you wear those to dinner because that's all you've got, and then you put them on the next morning because that's all you've got. And yeah, poor Ross definitely should have earned a Medal of Honor for that trip.
I should have got a bonus for that one, but
You should have.
and I don't remember whether we actually talked about this in another podcast, but I think the other highlight in that was the morning of the race at Portimao when you and Naj and I leave the hotel. I'm driving on that twisty, weird little one-lane road, blasting along, come around a corner, and a car comes the other way, and I've got to kind of avoid to the side, hit that pothole, blow out a tire. The three of us pop out of the car, do a tire change in record time, get to the track, race. You and I then drive to Brisbane that night on a Space Saver tire, and then returning the rental car the next morning going, sure hope they don't charge me for this, which they didn't, which was great. So
Oh, that was funny. I remember when that happened too. You were like, "Oh, you guys should just try to find another way to the track. We'll get one of the team guys to come over and get you." And I was like, "Hey, we're three smart people. We can change this tire in no time." And sure enough, Ross got his hands dirty and got it changed while Naj and I offered some guidance from the side.
when you say three smart guys, I think between us we might have been one person's brain. I think when it came to changing that tire in that rental car.
Oh, it was fun. That was a
Yeah.
good time.
Yeah, obviously that's a big part of our sport is having some fun and the stories that come out of it. And you and I on those past podcasts, we have talked about things like the importance of brake release, thinking the approach to going fast in fast corners. Like how do you manage like a really, really fast corner, which I'd say is one of your special powers. How to learn a track quickly because even you were going to, I think that season you went to 6 tracks you'd never been to before. We talked about different driving techniques for different cars, which I think was interesting because I remember you talking about how you had driven, I can't remember, like everything from spec Miatas and open wheel cars to NASCAR Cup cars and prototypes and everything at Road Atlanta, and said you drive basically all of them the same way to some extent. Um,
Right, right.
so I don't know what part of driving should we talk about today?
Oof, that's a good question. There's certainly a lot of aspects to talk about. I think the topics that we've hit on previously are pretty darn interesting ones, and certainly for me, ones that, having worked with you since basically my first, day in a real race car, and even before that in in go-karts. Certainly it's it's always fun to talk driving techniques and driving, skills and those kind of things with you, because you've, you know, been a part of my whole path growing up and learning what I've learned. And so, yeah, certainly it's fun to have those topic discussions. And I think, maybe it was a couple weeks ago or a month or so ago where I called you with a question about, brake overlap when you lift off the throttle for a corner. How much is there any little tiny bit of brake overlap in that transition from on throttle to off throttle? And we kind of had a big, deep discussion about that whole concept. And, so for me, I'm always constantly searching to try to find, ways to improve and hone my craft. And it's fun having someone like you who is the master at it to be able to talk through those different kinds of things.
Well, I don't know about a master, because all I did was go, really? What do you think? but I wasn't sure whether to actually bring that conversation up in this podcast, because I don't. There are some little secrets in your driving that you probably want to keep. But I think, to me, the most important thing was the fact that, I don't think there's too many people in the world that would argue. And if I said, Colin, you're one of, if not the best sports car drivers in the entire world at the moment, and you're at the peak of your game, and here you are thinking, what could I do differently? What could I do to improve my driving? And you can talk about the details of that as much or not at all, but I think the biggest thing there was that you're just constantly looking for, what else could I do to be even better?
Well, and I think if I wasn't that way, you disown me as a friend and
sure.
as a student. So I don't have a choice in that. I have to keep pushing and try to find ways to be faster. But no, I mean, for me, it's just one of the things that, that I love about the sport of racing and driving, and my own just personal quest for trying to be faster and be better. And, I think there's so many different ways to be good at being a race car driver, right? I mean, it's not all, when you get to certain levels, about, the fastest lap you can do, or the, most fuel you can save, or the traffic management, or whatever. I mean, there's so many different facets of ways to improve and be good that's where I feel like there's never an end to, trying to improve, just because there's so many different ways to look at what you do as a race car driver, and try to really hone in and think about each skill you have and what can be better or what can be improved on, or where you're strong and where you're weak. And I think that sort of clinical approach to thinking about your driving, has definitely helped me become, better in being a complete driver.
So a few years back, somebody sent me, it was a graph and then some data and the story about Tiger Woods. And, when Tiger Woods was kind of in his prime, and, he was in 1 year, like he won, more than a record amount. And at the peak there, he and his coach worked on changing something in his swing technique. And, the following year, his results dropped down a little bit, but the year after that, they went higher than they had previously. And then at the peak of that, he changed again. And it was like, I think there were 2 or 3 times where at the peak of his game, he made a change in the way he played. And that actually, and it actually hurt for a little period of time, but then went even higher than ever before.
Wow. Yeah.
So I think, obviously there's a guy that was, I don't know about is anymore, but, no comments on his personal life in the past little while, but,
right.
There's a guy that's just at the top of his game. He's like, well, what could I do to be even better? And so what do you see in other drivers at your level? Do you see guys that are kind of get there, and I'm not going to say they're cruising, but they're not looking for that last tiny little bit, and like you are?
Well, for sure. I mean, I think there's definitely, people at, let's even call it at my sort of peer group level that have reached a high level in sports car racing, for instance, that are very talented, very good drivers, and have a lot of skill. But I feel like there's definitely a few guys out there that I know of. We probably can all have different sort of people on our lists, but people that are what I would consider a bit complacent when it comes to where they're at. This goes back to the whole like Ayrton Senna versus Prost thing, and natural talent and working hard and all these different things. But I think there's a lot, definitely some guys that naturally are super duper gifted and fast and can just make it look easy, that don't work that hard. And I think there's the flip side of that, and I can think of guys that we both know that are super duper dedicated hard workers, and they go fast because they come at it from that side. And I think if you can blend the two of those things together, I think that's when you really have some magic for sure.
I know that you've been working super hard at trying to get an IndyCar ride, which you should be in an IndyCar because I think you'd be kicking butt there.
Thank you.
But I think there was I just recently had a conversation, and I'm not going to name any names, but two current IndyCar drivers who don't care about simulators. They're just not going to bother. And it was, the conversation I was having was, why would somebody at that level not embrace them and use it as a tool to become even better? And my observation is at least one of them is in that complacent role or position in their life. They're like, I'm getting paid to drive Indy cars. Why should I do that extra? And right. What a shame. I'm sitting there going, oh man, put Colin in there.
Hey, why not? Why not? No, I think it's just, it's one of those things. And I think, you've studied it a lot further than I have, but I think probably a lot of it comes down to just your general personality. I mean, my personality is definitely always questing to try to be better and improve things and figure out how to, even in my own personal life of just living in my home and doing projects around the house and things like that. I mean, I'm always just kind of on this quest to improve and make things better, and definitely drives my wife crazy sometimes. But, I think that bleeds over into, the racing side of things. And certainly for me, I'm never going to be that complacent, just, kind of go with it sort of guy, because that's just not in my personality.
So I got to ask this, and we've never had this conversation, but do you see a day where you're going to go, that's it, I've worked enough at this, I'm done?
Oof, I don't know. I mean, I think I say this now, but if I feel like I've gotten to that point, I think that's the day that I should be done driving, honestly, because, for me, so much of the fun of driving and what I enjoy is continuing to improve and find ways to get better and, learn new things. And, I certainly want to keep pushing forward and trying to do that kind of thing. And I don't think I'll ever get to the point where I said, oh, that's it. There's no more to be learned. There's no more to be had. And I'm done. I don't think so. I hope not.
I'm thinking maybe 50 years from now, maybe.
That'll put me at the early 80s age frame. So then. With
your little walker up to the car.
I hope we're still racing cars back,
in
50 years from now.
Yeah. Actually, as you were talking about that, I was thinking about, the work that you do with Trey Shannon at Podium Performance Fitness.
Yep.
And, some of the stuff you guys have been working on in terms of balance and vision and reactions and all that kind of stuff, that's another area that I guess, obviously, because I know some other drivers that are doing the same kind of stuff with you there, but, there are some that are working at that kind of thing, and some just like, what? Really? You can do that? Again, I guess it's just, like you said, it's that drive that you've got, and some do, but some don't have that last tiny little bit of drive, and that is going to make the difference.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think to be in sports car racing and be in the top top end of that. I think I think most of those guys are going to have pretty high drive to keep doing better and being better. And, even for me, I think in the last 10 or 15 years that I've been racing in sports cars, I know I had a bit of a time in NASCAR, but if I sort of compare that back to, when I first got into racing in Grand Am in the Daytona prototype days, just the level of effort that I think a lot of the drivers put in now across the board is probably higher, in terms of guys focusing on their fitness, guys eating right, guys doing simulator training, guys doing the balance and the vision training stuff that we kind of do here with Trey. Those kind of things I think were a little less commonplace back 15 years ago when I first got into it in my day. But, now I think that's kind of what you've got to do just to stay on an even footing, let alone try to do that to get ahead.
Recently, I was your dad and I were both speaking at an event, and Dan Davis, the former head of Ford Motorsport Worldwide, was also speaking at it, and he talked about the thing that made him want to have Ford sign you as a driver was the story about you in your go-kart in the middle of summer in Texas in whatever 300 degrees or whatever it was in Texas, and you wearing a snowmobile suit and driving in that a shifter cart for an hour as part of your training. And he's like, there's a guy that I want. That's the level of commitment. Actually,
and you make a joke about that. You make a joke about that, but I'm pretty sure my dad I called you and ran that idea by you, and you thought that was the greatest idea ever. So that was a Ross, homegrown concept and idea right there.
Well, for me, it's all about the punishment. So, but just for people listening, the detail, you guys had a go-kart track essentially in your backyard in the middle of Texas. But you'd go out in the shifter cart with a snowmobile suit on in whatever, 100-something degrees. And
it was, at the time when back then, that's when the Grand Am Daytona prototype cars were super duper hot inside. They didn't have, I don't know why exactly. I guess the radiators were in the front of the car, and all the engineers wanted the cars as light as possible. So cool suits and helmet blowers weren't as commonplace as they are now, as they were back then. And so, cockpit temperatures in those cars were like 130 to 145 degrees kind of range. And so, being fit and being able to, be sharp and think through things and not fall out of the seat in those temperatures was super important. So my dad had built a go-kart track when I was a kid so that we could get experience, as he was busy racing on the weekends, engineering in IndyCar and sports cars. We had this go-kart track for a long time. And so I thought of what better way to get used to training in driving in the heat than putting a big snowsuit on and going out in the middle of the day in Texas when it's 100 degrees out and doing, a tank of fuel in the shifter cart and just getting used to working and thinking and being sharp and focused in the heat and when the G-forces are high and all those kind of things. So I think that was definitely really helpful for me as a young driver, kind of trying to make a name for myself early on.
And then I think you drove into the night, right? Where the
visibility did some of that too.
Yeah. Yeah. I'm surprised we didn't drive around and beat you with a stick at the same time.
Well, we can't talk about those things on this podcast, right?
Yeah. Your parents
There's
would get
some
arrested.
Child labor laws or something.
Yeah. Hey, one other thing I want to talk about is because I've had these conversations a lot recently, and the whole idea of, I know some drivers that are super, super, super analytical, and they get caught up in the details of the driving line and the technique and looking at data and studying video, and they're just constantly in their head. And there are other drivers who are just winging it out there. They just drive. And to me, the very, very best drivers always have that ability to kind of balance those two things. And, kind of going back, and I think a place that you see that, you could see it, it's very dramatic, is at a place like Indy and the 500 and stuff at the Speedway, where there were drivers that would show up who didn't think, and they were very, very brave, and they were very fast, but most of them spent time in Methodist Hospital or worse. You know, and then on the flip side of that, there were drivers that showed up there who were very analytical and very thinking drivers, and you know, they left just a tiny little bit of speed on the table. They never quite got that last little bit out. And you know, to me, one of the greatest IndyCar oval racers, especially drivers of Rick Mears, obviously because of how much he won in IndyCars, but he had that ability to work on the car and the setup and the data and everything, all those tools that he had up to a certain point. And then there was that point, and I always use the example of the pass that he made on Michael Andretti on the outside going into turn one, I think in 93, I think that was at the Speedway, you know, where it was like, he was no longer thinking. He was just like, I'm making a pass, 10 laps to go, and he wins the thing, right? So he had that ability to be analytical and thinking and then switch it off and just drive. And I'd say, you know, that's something that you do extremely well. How do you do that?
Oof.
Do you know how you do it?
Well, you know, it's interesting for me. A couple things. I think, number one, I think as I've done in the last 5 or 6 years, more driver coaching with folks, I think it has forced me to really think about how I do things and be able to talk about how I do things in a simple way that I can convey to folks that I'm working with. And so I think that in one respect has made me be more of an analytical driver, because I'm thinking about, you know, the things that I've talked about, or I'm thinking about the things that we've looked at data or video on and how I'm doing things, and really kind of thinking through some of those concepts. And so I think that's made me a little bit more analytical maybe in one respect, but then also I know that it's important to be able to just switch it off and drive and just, you know, kind of do subconsciously what you do. And so for me, I've tried to really focus and emphasize on, in the last couple of years, being able to like consciously think about whatever I'm trying to do or whatever I'm trying to work on in the car, but really subconsciously sort of let my body just do the driving and feel, you know, what's going on, and just let all that kind of totally subconsciously fill in, and just kind of let it do its thing. And so I think then that almost frees my conscious mind up to kind of guide my subconscious to, you know, hey, remember I'm working on this here as I'm going down the straightaway, but then I kind of forget about it and just go through the corner. And I think just having that awareness of what I'm trying to work on and being able to consciously think about that and then subconsciously just kind of letting it filter through has been what works well for me. You know, if I think about it too much and think about every tiny little thing I'm doing, especially in, you know, the fast prototype cars and GT3 cars even, if I consciously think about it, I definitely can't keep up well enough, and you start to get behind. And so for me, it's just kind of that awareness and then subconsciously letting it happen.
A couple things there. I mean, the first thing is, because of the coaching that you've been doing in the last few years especially, you say that you become more analytical and thinking about that. Does that help or hurt your driving?
I think it helps my driving because I understand a bit more of what and how to go fast, like from a clinical, from like a surgical, you know, kind of approach, like, you know, fundamentally how to go fast and what needs to happen. And I think that has helped me to a point. And then I think it becomes that whole, you know, you've got to just drive the car on the edge and kind of do the art side of driving to be fast. But I think with that, like I was saying before, kind of with that, you know, in my head and you know, my conscious kind of having a picture of what it looks like, but my subconscious just doing it, I think is the good blend for me.
Because I know that for me, there was a period in my driving career where I wasn't driving as much as I'd like to. I would say that I was an underemployed race driver. And, trying to make a living. So I was doing a lot of instructing, coaching stuff. And I think for me, it actually hurt my driving for a period of time, for some period of time. I don't know if it was a day or a year or whatever, but I actually think I started to become too clinical, as you were talking about, like too technical, thinking about, oh, I should be doing this, I should be hitting that apex, I should be, and I overthought that and tried to drive too perfectly. And I think maybe what it was, the excuse I'm going to use was I wasn't driving as much as you are. So my level of trust and confidence in my subconscious, my programming, wasn't strong enough to kind of go, okay, just drive.
Right.
And I think, obviously you couldn't be at the level you're at without that trust in yourself, that confidence in yourself it's okay just to let go and just drive.
Well, and I think that's an interesting blend, though, and I think you're kind of saying a similar thing to what I'm saying. And, that is like, and what I personally do, even today, when I'm driving a IMSA prototype car or, GT3 car or whatever, my own way of kind of going faster and working through it is I like to pick a couple of things, 2, 3, 4 things that I'm going to try to improve on. And I like to come up with that good, clear plan in my head, consciously thinking about it during, in between sessions or in between, in the evening if there's not another session, but, come up with a really good plan in my head before I go on the track again of exactly what I'm going to try to do. And then run through that in my mind, do a bit of programming with it. And then, just kind of give myself a couple of gentle reminders during the session, consciously. But because I've got it in my head so well and it's kind of programmed in so well that it just kind of, goes into my subconscious and I just kind of drive and, wow, look, I did exactly of those things that I was working to improve. And so I think it's finding that blend of, what works for each person, but finding that blend of, improvement focus without being overly focused where it hinders you,
So do you have when you go out for a practice session, you're more in the mode of tuning the car. So you're being aware of how the car is handling and, maybe, the car isn't quite doing this. So maybe I could change the way I approach my driving here to make the car do what I want. So you're more in that analytical mode, I would say. And then when you get to qualifying, and I'm thinking about your pole lap at Mosport last year, which was just unbelievable. Talk about commitment kind of a thing. It's just, do you make is there a conscious switch, or is it just like, okay, it's qualifying mode now, go?
Yeah, I think for me, it's not a huge conscious switch. I mean, I'm definitely putting it more on the edge and more on full kill, so to speak. But, and obviously with my dad having been my engineer for the last couple of years at CORE and having the relationship that we do, we've had this discussion quite a lot. And for me, when we're in a practice session, we're working on improving the car and trying to find lap time that way. I don't really drive the car any different, or I don't really take any conscious effort to focus on, okay, really feel the front tire and what it's doing. And then what happens when I get to the middle of the corner and what happens when I'm back on the throttle. For me, I just sort of drive the car subconsciously. And I like to try to drive the car pretty darn hard all the time because I feel like you're going to have to do that in the race. You're going to have to do that in qualifying. So, I drive at 9.8 to 9.9 of 10 kind of all the time just because I'm working on trying to make my race car faster. And to make it faster, I think you need to see what it does pretty darn close to the limit. And so I do that subconsciously. And then I kind of use my conscious mind once I'm kind of through a corner to kind of go, oh, wow, a little more front grip there. I can do this. I can do that next time. But I'm not focused as I'm going through the corner, really thinking about it at all. I just kind of go through the corner, and I have enough experience, and I've, been doing this for long enough that, it almost just kind of naturally comes to me like, oh, cool, more front grip. I should, roll a little more speed, or I could use that to turn the car a little more in the middle and get back to the throttle sooner next time. And it's not like super conscious thinking through it. And then when I'm sort of done with my run in practice, I usually like to try to kind of collect my thoughts on, the in lap on the straightaways or things like that, and kind of come up with, my own debrief version so that I can give it to the engineer and kind of say, hey, this is what changed, this is what's better, this is what is worse, and this is what I need to go faster. But all that kind of happens, for me, sort of automatically and without having to really think about it too much, because my subconscious was just driving the car. And it's almost like it's two different people. Like my subconscious is driving and my conscious mind is sort of watching, oh, wow, yeah, more front grip there. Oh, it pitched more on the brakes and then got a little bit, darty on the entry, maybe because the splitter's down too much. And so those kind of things just kind of process in my mind, but pretty separately from actually driving the race car.
I often describe driving in the zone or in flow as just the way you did. It's you trust your subconscious, your mental programming to drive the car, but your conscious mind is kind of watching, being aware of either what the car could do better, what you could do better, or, hey, that car is there, that means I got to do something different here. So all of that's going on. But again, it comes back to you got to trust your programming to do it.
Absolutely, I think. And you have to trust your subconscious and your programming, as you say, to just kind of flow and not get your conscious mind in the way of that doing what it's going to do,
And you, I mean, because you coach a lot of drivers as well of varying levels, it's easy for somebody to sit there and go, oh, well, I can see how that works for Colin at his level. But, I've been doing this for 3 years, doing some track day events for 3 years. I'm not at that level. I think the same thing applies, right? Like, I think, yes, your programming might be, I'm going to say probably, better than somebody that's been doing track days for 3 years. So your programming is a higher level, but, it's like version 6.0 of somebody that's got it software version 1.0, right? But the same thing, I mean, that person that's been doing track days for 3 years still has to trust their subconscious, their programming to drive at that 1.0 level. Does that make sense?
No, it certainly does. I think that's super true. And I think for someone that's listening that might be early on in their track day, career and getting into it, I think a lot of the same things can still apply. I just, you're more of an expert than I am, but I think, and it's sort of going along with what you said, my version is 6.0. And so I can realize and really understand and process maybe a bit quicker, hey, I was braking before at the 3 marker, let's call it. I want to go 10 feet deeper and brake 10 feet deeper because I think that's the max point, the latest point I can brake, where I think the person on the V1 probably doesn't have the refined ability to move that brake point 10-foot notch deeper. They may go 4 or 5 deeper, and then they find themselves, oh, I'm too deep, and they go too wide, and they've missed the corner. And so I think it's sort of a bit of both. You have to be able to subconsciously kind of let it flow and let it drive, but you also have to have that deep, V6 programming to be able to let that happen. Where I think early on you may have to put some more conscious effort to really trying to understand the fundamentals and being able to increase your ability to make small, tiny little changes in your driving so that you can brake 10 feet deeper and not 50 feet deeper. I've got more of a finer ability to tune my driving, and I think that's what then lets you subconsciously just kind of let it flow, right?
That's a really good point, and I'm kind of picturing this almost, I don't know if it's a graph or an image here of, you've got the conscious and the subconscious, and the amount of time you spend right now, for you, it's maybe it's a circle. The amount of time you put into conscious thought in the car is quite small, whereas the circle of subconscious is bigger. And somebody that's new, it's the other way around. The conscious thought is quite big and the subconscious part is smaller. And over time, the goal is to get so that, hey, in the ultimate thing, you would not think whatsoever consciously, you would just do, right?
Right.
But I think still, even somebody that's early on, there's still that trust. You need the trust in that subconscious part of it. So it's interesting stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I think absolutely you have to put that trust in the subconscious, and I think the better that you get, the more you're able to make smaller and smaller changes to your driving and feel the difference. It's I personally believe that like a great pro race car driver really doesn't make any less mistakes than someone that's brand new to driving. We're just better at being able to make smaller versions of those mistakes. When I brake too late, I brake too late by, pick the number, 5 feet or 10 feet. When someone new brakes too late, they brake too late by 50 or 100 feet. And it's, very visible that they made a mistake. And I think, the more experience you get and kind of get to that, pro driver level, you're able to, change your apex speed by, I don't know, half a mile an hour, or 0.3 of a mile an hour. And I think, that gives you more options to really subconsciously let go and just drive, because all the little mistakes you're making are these mistakes that are, manageable and able to recover from pretty quickly. And so I think to get there, you've got to subconsciously kind of let it go. But I think to the process of learning that, I think you've got to definitely focus some time and think through, what's going on, even when it's happening. And maybe as I talk about it, it kind of puts me back to the Tiger Woods topic that you brought up, that, hey, he made some fundamental changes. It took him back a little bit, but then when he sort of subconsciously just used that new swing, it's way better. And so maybe it's kind of the same thing.
Yeah, absolutely. So here's a question. You mentioned earlier you like to sit down beforehand and think about what are the 2, 3, 4 things that you're going to work on with your driving when you go back on track. So you kind of put that plan together. You ever go back out on track and you're not able to do one of them? Like, you're like, I want to, I don't know, brake 10 feet later, or I want to turn in sooner or later, or get to throw. And you just like, I can't get that to work. I can't do it.
Yes, I do. And then I do exactly what you've taught me to do, which is blame my engineer.
Yeah, perfect. Well, you can blame the car, but in your case, it's going to go directly to the engineer. So.
Right to the engineer. Just, I mean, the car won't do it. It's probably this poor setup that I'm having to drive around.
Yeah. You're making the car look good.
It's a tough job, right?
Yeah.
No, but I mean, certainly, that happens. And then, as you've taught me, and as I continue to do, I mean, you've got to kind of look at the whole thing. Like, okay, why didn't that work, right? I mean, was it the way that I tried to execute it? Was it what I'm trying to do is just not achievable for, the car setup or the grip level or whatever that's going on? Or, maybe I was able to do it, but it was slower. I mean, for me, oftentimes, I'll try things and think that it's going to be better, and come to find out, it didn't really gain any lap time, or it was worse for this reason or that reason. So I think, it's not always, for me, I'm not always able to execute what I'm trying to improve, for sure.
Have you had the experience, and I'm going to say more recently in the last, 3, 4, 5 years or something like that, where it's a really, really, really fast corner, and it's one of those things where I think I could do it flat or near flat or less of a lift or something like that, and you just can't get your foot to stick there. Like I think about when Fernando Alonso went to Indy for the first time. He talked about turn one at Indy, and it's like, and he said something along the lines of, the right foot and the mind are not not connected. Like even he would lift for turn one. Do you have that experience still?
A place like like a Mossport, or there's some corners like turn 10 at Watkins Glen in the DPI cars that are super duper close to being flat out. And you're constantly kind of having that inner battle in your mind of like, should I do it? Should I not? Can I do it? Can I not? And, for me, I think I certainly have had times when I felt like, oh yeah, that's definitely pretty flat, but we should probably check the data. And I always know when I have that feeling that I didn't do it flat. When I've had the feeling of like, oh yeah, for sure, 100% that's flat, then it's true. But, as soon as I kind of get that little bit of doubt in my mind, I know that I didn't do it flat. And, I've then gone back out and done it flat. And then you look at the data and you compare it. But oftentimes in the sports car world, at least, it's these corners that you think should be flat, but they're not. And you have that whole battle going on that you disappointingly then check the data and look at when you've done it flat, that it's actually slower than if you had a tiny bit of a lift at the right point, because you just crank the steering wheel angle in and just bog and slow the car down, and it ends up being worse. I can think back to, I think it was 2014 or 15. I was driving a IMSA Lights car for a guy in practice, coaching him. So I was going to make a few laps in practice, and he had told me that, there's no way you could do turn one and turn two flat out in Mossport in his IMSA Lights car. And so with that sort of a challenge, I said,
that's a challenge. Yeah.
No problem. Let me go see what I can do. So I did a couple laps with a little tiny lift in each corner. And then I did like 2 laps flat through 1, flat through 2. And sure enough, it was slower doing it flat out, just because you end up putting so much wheel in, it just binds the car up. And so, that's kind of always stuck in my head. And so of recent, I've tried not to let myself get too wrapped up in that whole thing, because sometimes I think you end up working overly hard to go slower, really.
Well, it's interesting you're talking about that, because there's also the flip side of that. And, there may be somebody listening to this that are going, well, I can't even get anywhere near flat. In fact, I get to turn one and I got a big lift. And then they make that big lift as they're turning into the corner. The car unsettles and they have a near-death experience, and they go, see, it can't be taken anywhere near flat. So there's kind of there's a balance there. Like you said, you can sometimes do it flat, but you're scrubbing off more speed doing that. But sometimes it's the actual lift of the throttle that causes the car to become unweighted or unsettled, and then it makes it even worse. So I guess that's what makes us want to keep coming back and doing this, right? It's not easy.
Well, and I think that kind of goes back to, what we were talking about earlier, right? I mean, that's the kind of thing to sit there and think about between the sessions, like, did I lift at the wrong point? You have the time then to mechanically sit there and think through and talk through, even if it's just with yourself, what's going on? When I lift off the throttle and turn the wheel at the same time, is that a good thing or is that a bad thing? You can just talk through a lot of those things. I think far too often people try to have those conversations with themselves as they're driving, and it's too much to process, and they don't drive well, and they don't think through things well, and it's just a loss. And so, I like to, when I coach guys or when I'm driving myself, I really like to try to put a big focus on, picking a few things to work on only those things. Come back, sit down, think about it, talk through it, come up with the next group. And, it could be exactly the same thing again that you're trying to improve, just with a different way to sort of execute the technique. But I think you're better off, really focusing and spending time sitting there, not in the race car, thinking through some of the fundamental techniques of why that worked or why it didn't work.
That's good advice. And speaking of advice, I'm going to let you get back to your simulator, your recently upgraded simulator, to do some practice and training there. But before you go, a piece of advice, your speed secret, your one piece of advice for drivers, and it could be related off of what we talked about today or something completely different.
Well, it's tough, because I've been on this a few times and I've had
You're
like
running out?
1 speed secret, only one speed secret. So it's a challenge for me to come up with something. Yeah, it's a tough one. I mean, I think kind of keeping with the theme of what we've been talking about today, I think, and everyone kind of has their own triggers and words or, whatever in their minds to get these programs brought up. But for me, it's one that I use currently, which is like all of these talking and thinking and working through things and, putting the science to driving is great. But then for me, the word, and he's a great friend of mine, Paul Tracy. I like to use the word Paul Tracy as sort of my, turn off all of the thinking parts and just drive Jesus out of the race car when it comes time to just really, really go for a big lap like at Mossport in that DPI car in qualifying. It's just, that's my trigger is PT and just go and drive the car. So maybe people can use that.
So could I say the trigger is PT it?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
That's cool. So when I had Paul on the podcast, whenever that was last year, whenever that was, it's fascinating to talk to somebody like that who I think the world of Paul, and I think from a pure kind of natural ability to just to wring the neck on a car, he's one of the best there's ever been. I think he could just drive the wheels off of it, and if you look at people and go, who's got natural talent? Paul. Did he make a few mistakes along the way? Sure. What? He could wheel a car.
Yes. No, I mean, he's obviously had a great career and super successful, but I think, if you could use the great parts of a Paul Tracy and some of the great parts about, someone that's really methodical and thinks through things and all that, I think you could package together sort of the ultimate driver, the complete driver. And so, for me, I think there's a time and a place for all those things.
That's cool. While we're talking about PT, I mean, one of the things that I think is certainly surprised me is just how great a TV commentator he is. I love his insights. I love the way he thinks about stuff and says what he thinks.
Yeah, I know for sure. I mean, talking with Paul a bit about that kind of thing. I mean, he's definitely found a kind of a passion for all of the years and experience and knowledge that he has. And, I think as racers, we all sort of get to the point where we enjoy talking about what we do. We love what we do so much, and we want to, continue to share that with a broad audience. And so he's done a great job of, finding a way to be interesting and relevant and entertaining and, pass on all that experience and knowledge that he has. And, I think it's super entertaining. And I think, some of the kind of I guess the view I had of Paul has changed sometime over the course of the years as he's commentated, because some of his commentating is so analytical and so deep that it makes me wonder, back when he was driving the race car and really on the edge of things, was he really analytical and then he'd switch that off and just go drive like Paul drove? And, was he flicking that on and off, or was that something he gained later in life? Or, but I mean, guy's super analytical for sure.
Yeah, the other thing that I remember about our conversation on the podcast was my takeaway was he wants to get better at being a TV commentator, which I think goes back to the conversation that we had at the very beginning here is it's all about your passion for improving.
Big time. And, he's got tough competition, I guess you might say, right? Everyone loves Townsend. Townsend's super polished and all those things. And so I'm sure there's an element of, Paul wants to beat his teammate over there.
yeah, which is great stuff. So, so Colin, I'll let you get back to it. Hey, the usual links I'll put in the show notes about following you, but do you have a favorite social media thing these days, or do you want to ignore it all, or where are you at to?
No, I like it. I don't have a TikTok account. I guess that's the latest rage. I don't have one of those. I'm not going to get one of those. I don't think. I'm sticking with, Instagram and Twitter, those are kind of my two main things, and all my stuff also feeds over to Facebook. So I always enjoy engaging with everyone and talking, and obviously it's been over the time with the virus going on and things like that, it's changed a bit of the landscape of social media, and made a bit more time to engage with the fans. So that's been fun.
Well, I'm glad you're doing that, but I would much rather see you back in a car. And I hope that we're all back at the track here very, very soon. So,
can't wait.
Yeah, I know. I think about you and some other drivers, and I can see that you guys like almost vibrating, like, come on, let me get back on a car, just going crazy with this stuff. But we'll get back there.
For sure, it certainly reignites the passion. For sure, I can't wait.
Yeah, maybe that's a good way to looking at it too. So. Colin, as always, I'll see you at the track one of these days sometime soon. And, I was going to say the usual, keep learning and having fun, but I say that to you all the time. And I think you got that part.
I will. Don't worry.
Okay. Thanks, Colin.
The best kept secret in all of motorsports is, well, that would be a secret. But for sure, one of the best secrets is Speed Secrets Weekly. It's an e-newsletter that will hit your inbox every single Tuesday. It's jam-packed with tips, advice, opinions, and it's all designed to help you be an even better driver. It's education that's entertaining, and it's conveniently delivered. Because it's secret, you do have to subscribe. That's how Ross keeps the secret tips and tricks for those drivers who are really committed. Go to speedsecrets.com/speedsecretsweekly and click on the big blue button. That way you can keep learning and prepare for more fun at your next track session.